Good evening, guys. I'm an alcoholic. My name's Ducey D. Ruth, thank you for asking me to speak up here. Just up here to tell you about, like everybody else that gets up here, tell you a little bit about what happened, what it was like, what happened, and how it is today, you know. And my sobriety date, actually, I've already picked up 20 years. My sobriety date's April 29th of 2002. And, you know, Bill Wilson said it best. He said how dark it was at dawn, before the dawn, you know. And I think about that day when I walked in here, man, and everything in life worthwhile was gone, and I was whooped, and I was beat, and I was about to die, and I was ready to make a change, you know. And you know, I sit back in this room back here in this corner probably 35 years ago, man, as a kid, sitting in here in the cloud of smoke, and like I said in the big book, I scoffed, man. I was listening to these dudes talking. I mean, these meetings were about 3 hours and in Spanish back then, and I was like, man, what in the hell are they talking about? When's this thing gonna get over with, you know? And you know, I remember sitting in this building, and you know, I wasn't ready to quit drinking. You know, I wasn't ready to give it up, but I just remember sitting in here and thinking, man, these poor old fellas in here can't handle their liquor, and you know, and needless to say, I did make it on in here though. But I grew up down in Pine Bluff. That's where I grew up. About most of the boys I run around with down in Pine Bluff have all been through these rooms right there somewhere. You know, and I was raised up down that little old honky-tonk bar down there called the Pink Elephant. I can remember that place as a kid. You know, my old man and running around in that joint, man, and I can remember running around in that old bar on the weekends there and hanging out with one of them old dark pool halls with a couple old pool tables and some old pickles, pig feet, and old eggs and stuff up there on the bar, you know. And it's one of them old dark, seedy places, and had an old pinball machine in there, you know. And I can remember as a kid just loving to go hang out at that place down there, you know. And you know, but so growing up there in Pine Bluff, man, there was a half a dozen of us that run around that little town right there. And you know, I mean, I grew up in just a middle class family, just like anybody else. Had a good mom and good dad. They gave us what we needed. Probably not everything that I wanted, you know, but we got everything we needed. And you know, I remember hanging around in that little crowd right there, and I kind of felt at home with old boys in the neighborhood right there. But you know, like any alcoholic, if you listen to a lot of us get up here and speak, I remember I guess it was about the old third grade back then. They used to give us some old cat test, and you know, I took that old cat test and I did pretty good on it. And they put me on the bus and they shipped me over to Pinehurst over there, and they put me on what they called the gifted and talented class, and I was by far the least gifted and talented of them in there. But I wound up over there, and it seemed like most of the kids in there's parents were doctors and lawyers, and a lot better off than we were. And yeah, I can remember as early as third, fourth grade feeling less than, you know, man, just feeling like I wasn't as good as the crowd that over there, and I didn't do as good in school as all them kids that was in there. Like I said, I was probably struggled more than anybody over there, and got more trouble than anybody over there, and you know, it just never really felt like I fit in over there, you know. And you know, and I played sports growing up, man. Matter of fact, right before I pulled in here, I pulled in the old Colonial Heights out there. I used to play baseball up there as a kid, you know, and put in there and say a little prayer before I come up here. But you know, so I played sports and growing up, and yeah, I don't really know when I took my first drink. You know, I remember as a kid, my old man would send me to the refrigerator to get him a beer, and you know, he let me pop the top on it and take a swig of it, you know, and that was my reward for going to get him a beer, you know. But I do remember one time, that was probably been about 10 years old, and a bunch of them old crowd from the old Pink Elephant was over there at the house, and they were over there playing cards at the kitchen table over there. And you know, I remember going over there and getting a beer out of the refrigerator and popping the top and taking a swig of it and putting it on the table and getting it back from him, and doing that 2 or 3 times, you know. And you know, I remember he looked at me and he said, boy, one of these days I'm going to take you out. I'm going to let you drink all them beers. You can stand to drink. Your head hurts so bad, you don't want them no more. And it took about another 20 years to get to that point. But, you know, that day did come. But, you know, but I do remember when I took my first drink to get drunk. I was 15, just got to high school, and one of my old buddy's parents had gone out of town, and we all ganged up over there. You know, my old man and mom and a couple other couples that had a bar, old beach music bar up in downtown Southern Pines back in the years back called Bostic's. And, they closed that thing down. And I remember we had a pile of half a gallons of, there's probably half a dozen or a dozen to 15 bottles, half a gallon of liquor in there. Remember going down there before that party that night, swiping about 3 or 4 bottles of that liquor and taking it out there that night, and I remember a couple of things happened out there that night. Like I said, I got drunk first time, got sick, puked all over the place, blacked out. But I remember I had a good time, you know what I mean? And I tell you what else happened. I found me a group of friends that I fit in with. I found about 8 to 10, and we all like that. We all like to drink, and we found that old firewater, and we liked it, you know what I mean? And, and that's how it started, and back then, we'd drink on the weekends or something. We'd go to a party, or we couldn't find no party here. We'd go out in the woods and drink, and it didn't take long after I picked up that first drink that, we started smoking grass, and, all the started with that, and it didn't take long after that I started getting the consequences for my actions. It didn't take long after I started drinking and doing that stuff that I started getting in trouble. And of course in the beginning it was just a simple drinking underage, or simple possessions, things they give you old pink slip for, and you could pay them off and they go away, and of course, just like the progression of my alcoholism, the progressions of my troubles over the years went from that kind of stuff to, I think I had 3 DWIs before I was ever old enough to drink, and then just getting in trouble, fights, and assault on police officers, things that started locking me up for and putting me in jail for, and I went through, through my teenage years, and most of the time, if I had a girlfriend, I was somewhat a little calmer, you know what I mean? I'd go along, but I'd go along like it talks about in the big book, I'd go along there in spells, and I'd get in more trouble than I think I was ever going to get out of, and then I'd kind of settle on down a little bit, and I might go, 3 or 4 months, 5 months, and stay under the radar, and then all hell would break loose again, and a weekend or 2 weekends I'd be locked up back to back for whatever it was, and it just it was kind of that roller coaster ride, and I think about that spell along the way through my teenage years and through my 20s. I had several stints of coming into this room right here. Most of the time it's because the judge had sent me. I had to come in here and do some AA meetings. And I remember having to go out there and Sand Hills Mental Health and do the classes out there and get the old paper signed, and the kind of things we had to do. But I just remember coming in here and not being ready to get sober. Sitting in here and thinking, man, what am I doing in a place like this? I kind of went through that ride, and I remember. I guess I just turned 16, I think, and me and some old boys, we took off on a weekend. Went down to Rockingham. Went down to the Rock down there and pulled old Wild Western that weekend, and. I remember coming home that Sunday night, man, about blistered, and coming in the house, and my old man, he was a big old dude, and I remember he jumped on me that night, and he whooped up on me pretty good, and I remember they put me in the car, and they took me up to the police station up there in Southern Pines. They were going to try to have me committed into the psychiatric ward, and I remember I was sitting there in the police station till after midnight, and then they took me over to the hospital, and I sat in there till about 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, waiting on a psychiatrist to come up, and he finally got there, and I think after a simple question, he threatened to kill y'all or himself in the last 4 hours, and they was like, no, and he said, well, I can't commit him or something, whatever, so they had to let me go, and I remember we were coming home, and I remember an old man pulled right there at old Sand Hills Floors down there where that old car lot is now, and I remember he said, hey boy, I don't give a damn where you go, just don't ever come back to my house again, and he put me out on the side of the street right there about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I made it back up to Aberdeen up there, and found an old buddy of mine. He'd already been booted out of his house, and went up there, and me and him went and A couple days later, found this old trailer out there on Pine Bluff Lake Road out there. Old James Saunders had some old rundown trailers out there. They were about 40, 50 years old back then. And we moved in that old trailer, and I quit school. And, man, I went to work, started building houses for a living. And, I can remember getting up and going to work and coming home at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, man, and the trailer would pack. It was already full of people, and the party was on, and I think I stayed in there about a year. We stayed in there about a year, and we got drunk and high every day, and never did scrape up enough money to turn the old heat on, but we got high and drunk every day in that place, and I just kind of went. I went on along with the program, just like like most of us at that age, man. It was trouble, just like you say, it was fun for a while, and then it was trouble, and I got in a lot of trouble along the way, but so did everybody else that I run around with. That was just kind of par for the course, so in the midst of quitting school and going to building houses, I actually built a little business, and started framing houses, and I got my contractor's license at 22, and started building houses, and started actually making some money, and I did like any old good alcoholic does, the more money I made, the more I blew on drinking and the drugs and the other stuff that came along with it, and I say the drugs, I know it's an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and I'm an alcoholic, and I'm a drug addict, and I'm a sex addict, and I'm a gambling addict, and it ain't many 12-step programs they got that I don't qualify for, but I found a home in AA here, and I found in the last 20 years I ain't took a drink of liquor. I ain't been doing none of that other stuff either, but I sit there and think about that spell of going through my 20s, and again I'd go along there, and if I had a girlfriend, I'd be somewhat settled down, but I'd get in trouble, and I'd wind up in some of these AA meetings, and then but I remember being about 25 or so, and my mom worked for VR up here for years and years and years, and she helped a lot of people, worked with a lot of people over there in the recovery houses, and helped a lot of people out in recovery, and I remember I was probably about 25, and I'd been on a run for about 4 or 5 days and ain't been to bed. And I remember going in there and waking her up one morning about 4 o'clock in the morning and telling her, man, I got to get some help. I got to do something different. I'm gonna die if I don't do something. I'm ready to make a change, And I remember she set me up with old Rick Bickle over at Recovery Associates over there, man. If y'all remember Rick from back in the day. I remember going over there and working with him for about a month and seeing him. Of course, he sent me back to these AA meetings right here, and had me come down here. And, I remember thinking I was tired and I was ready to make a change, but I wasn't quite that ready, And that's the funny thing about a lot of us. We come in here and they ask us, we tell them we want some help, and they said, well, hey, come to meetings, said raise your hand, say you need, get your sponsor, read the big book, come to these meetings, if you get sobered up, help another alcoholic, and maybe don't hang out in the bars and don't run around with them old drug dealers you run around with, and but I didn't want to quit doing none of that. I didn't want no more consequences, but I didn't want to do none of them things they told me to do, and that's what a lot of us do. We come in here and we ask for help, and they tell us what to do, and the message has never changed. From the first meeting I walked into to today, it's all those things I just said, but I didn't want to do them, and I just wasn't ready. I hadn't had enough yet, and I think I hung around and talked to him for about a month, and I think I put the bottle down for about a month. I never from the first drink I picked up to the last one I put down went more than a month though without doing something. I might have put the bottle down, but I was either smoking grass or eating pills or doing something along the way, but and again, from 15 to 25, my life was a party. You know what I mean, man? I drank a lot of liquor and did a lot of dope and raised a lot of hell and got in a lot of trouble, and I enjoyed it. That was just par for the course. But I tell you what, that last 5 years, and particularly those last 2 or 3, when it had me and it wouldn't let me go, and the bright lights and the good times were over with, it went from them partying and having a good time to, I can't tell you how many 1,000 mornings I sit there and I watch that damn sun come up, peeking out that window with bag of dope or a bottle of liquor or both most of the time, and going, man, I can't do this anymore. The day's today. I'm gonna do something different. And and I did that 1,000 times. I mean, there was no bright lights and good times. All that was gone, and I was, man, the guilt and shame was on me. And in that last 5 years, man, I went out there and bought me a big old piece of land out there on 73. Went out and built me a big old damn house. Had me old couple strippers living down in the basement down there, and had me old sports car and a damn motorcycle and a boat, bought all that good stuff. On the outside everything looked great, you know what I mean? Man, it looked like, and I just remember that, trying to fill that old black hole, man, I mean, liquor by the half gallon and cocaine by the ounce, and all that other stuff, and it just, there was no filling that old black hole that was in my soul. I went through every dime I made trying to fill that black hole, and I remember there at the end, man, many times being out there and being on a 2 or 3 day run, ain't showed up for work, ain't nobody heard nothing from it, and they'd start coming and looking for me. They could hear them out there knocking on the doors and the windows, man, and I was a grown man, 30 years old, and I can remember going in there and getting in the closet and closing the door, turning the lights off, and just sitting there going, man, I hope they go away. I just didn't want them to see what I'd become, man. And I can just remember the I knew I wasn't living right. I mean, everybody around me could see I wasn't, but I was still trying to put the show on that everything was all right. And I was, I was falling apart, man. And it was, again, I was trying to find a way to make it. And I remember right before I got sobered up, my old man, man, I really and there at the end, my life condensed down to 4 or 5 alcoholics and drug addicts that lived the way I did. You know what I mean? They drank liquor and they did dope the way I did, and the crowd that I grew up with that, in the 20s, they like to drink liquor and do some dope and raise a little hell, but most of them settled on down and got married, went and got them a job and started having kids and raising families, and here I was still out there running around like I was 17, didn't have a care in the world, and still just hitting as hard as I could go, and I didn't go hang out with them, I didn't go eat at the places that didn't sell liquor, I did, everything condensed down to, again, a few alcoholics and drug addicts that lived the way I did, and I remember right there at the end, in my family, my mom, them old mamas, man, they're just all want to help you the best they can, and I just wasn't going to let them happen, and I sit back and think about through them years of them crying mamas and them judges and them girlfriends and all them ones that wanted to see me get sober, and it just, until I drank all the liquor I could stand to drink, there wasn't nothing none of them was going to say, to get me in here and make me try to find another way to live, But, I remember before I got sobered up, my old man wanted to come over. He called me up and wanted to come over one night and watch up on the satellite or something out there. And, I told him a lie, just like always. I'm busy. I got something going on. I didn't have nothing going on. I just didn't want him coming out there bothering me, And remember, he had a stroke. And next morning, I don't know how he called me, but he called me, and I went down there and found him. He was laying there paralyzed in the floor. Got him up, got him to the hospital, and he was paralyzed. He was in the hospital for a couple months, but he was in the hospital part for about 2 weeks, and I remember going by there to see him, and I remember him saying, "Hey son, I've been in here, they're getting ready to move me down to physical therapy tomorrow. I have this hospital bed, I need some shaving kit and some underwear and whatever he needed, I ain't got none of this gallon I've been in, and I remember telling him, yeah, I'll go by here and get that for you tonight. And that was the kind of thing. I had all intentions on doing that. Yeah, but I stopped by that old watering hole up there at the old sports page, and I just wanted to get a beer, maybe 2. Just like all them other thousands of times that I had walked in there, and I never one time walked in that bar on a Monday or Tuesday afternoon at 4:30 and said, boy, I can't wait to watch the sun come up tomorrow morning. But damn if that ain't what just happened time and time and time again. And that's what happened that night. I remember just stopping there to get a beer or 2. And next thing you know, I remember sitting over at this old boy's house next morning about 10, 11 o'clock with an old bag of dope on the table. drinking, and just the old guilt and shame, man. I can still remember this day, the old guilt and shame that was on me, just knowing, man, I can't even do the simple things of getting him a pair of damn underwear over there to the hospital. But a couple of weeks after that was his birthday, and my brother come in town, and me and my old fiance at the time, we had a little birthday party over there for him at the hospital, and celebrated that. And it was a Saturday night, and that Saturday night we went on out after that, went on to the town, man, and I run around every bar in this town and 3 counties around back in the day, and we went on out, and we did what we always did, and remember getting back home that night, and I don't know what happened, me and that fiance got in a big old fight, man, and I beat her about half to death, and then I pulled out the gun, I shot the house up, and I remember sitting down in that chair there and sticking that gun under my chin and sitting there just crying and trying to get the courage up to pull the trigger on that thing. And all I can tell you is by God's grace, I finally just passed out, I guess. I don't know. And I remember a couple hours later, she'd evidently come to and called my mom, and my brother was in town. They come over there and got me about 4 o'clock in the morning and took the gun from me and got me too. And I can remember saying, hey, look, because before that old guy Ricky I was telling you about, I remember he wanted me. I went over and talked to him for about a month over that recovery place. And I remember he said, why don't you go down to that treatment center down there in Wilmington? We'll get you down there and get you in that treatment center. And I was like, man, I got like 15 houses I'm building right now, man. I can't run off and leave all this stuff and go down there to no treatment center, And I remember with his old famous words that we hear, and I remember he said, well, you just remember anything you put before your sobriety, you'll lose it. And I remember, whatever, and sure as shit, that's what happens. But, I remember them coming in there that night, and I remember telling my mom, I said, take me down to that treatment center. Take me right now, though. I remember I had a bottle of liquor in there on the table and a bag of dope in my pocket, and I said, take me down there now, and I'm going to drink and I'm going to do my dope all the way down there, but I need you to get me down there, because if you leave me alone and let me lay down, when I wake up in the morning, there'll be some reason tomorrow why I won't go, just like them other thousands of times when I swore today's the day I'm going to do something different, and I could never get there, so that's what we did. We got in the car and we took off, and we wound up down there in Wilmington. Actually, my brother lived down there at the time, down there running a strip club down there, and so we wound up in Wilmington down there, and I remember went in there and got down there and passed out at some point that morning and fell asleep for a little while, and come to, and I remember thinking, boy, what the hell have I got myself into? I went a little overboard telling them to bring me on down here that night. I remember being stranded down there in Wilmington with my mom, telling her I was going to go to this treatment center, and it's like, man, how am I going to get out of this now, But, and I remember, so we went over to that treatment center on Sunday afternoon over there, and they couldn't get me in that day. They were full, but they said, if you come back tomorrow, we got people leaving in the morning, and we can get you in tomorrow. And, I remember, so I went back to my brother's house that night. His old crazy roommate at that time, me and him went out that night, and I went out and had my last beer, and I went to some old bar down there on Market Street, and I remember sitting at that bar, and I remember drinking about half of it, and all I can remember is thinking, man, this is it. I'm done. I can't do it no more. I'm ready to make a change, and I walked in that treatment center that next morning, and I was terrified. I can tell you this. I've told you I wasn't scared of a damn thing in this world, but I was terrified, And I walked in that treatment center. I was terrified, but I was relieved a little bit. I felt like for the first time the damn game was over. I didn't have to pretend like everything was all right, And I walked in there and I threw my hands up. And for the first time I did what the hell they told me to do. Of all them times of coming into AA and being in here and giving me these suggestions, and telling me to get a sponsor and telling me to raise my hand at the beginning. I never did none of that stuff. And all I can tell you is I was ready. I had enough and I was ready, and I did what they told me to do in there. And, I remember I'd been in there maybe about 2 weeks, and it's almost like I had that moment of clarity that they talked about. And for the first time, I was able to look back over the last 15 years of my life and see that everything I did and whoever I run around with and all that other stuff, it all revolved around drinking liquor and doing dope, and I mean, that's the first time I'd ever seen it. I just couldn't, when you're in the middle of it, it became just like the Big Book said, my only normal way of life, and I remember I sitting there and I pulled my stent in there, and I remember, and I can tell you one of the things that kept me from getting sober a lot of them times was this God thing. Man, I didn't grow up going in church. My mom did, and her family did, but I didn't, I shunned it. I didn't like it other than getting drug in there or going to a wedding or a funeral. I didn't do a lot of praying growing up, and I can remember being a teenager and in my 20s and sitting here and looking up at that wall up there and seeing something about God and thinking, man, what has God got to do with me not drinking liquor? And I was closed-minded, I remember sitting in that treatment center, and about half of them was up there doing their 4 steps and 5 steps and all that, and I remember going in there and talking to that counselor of mine and going, man, I don't think this thing's going to work for me. I said, this come to believe in this higher power y'all talking about, I ain't got it. I ain't getting this. I don't know what you're talking about, and I remember her just saying, hey, take your time. Just come here and do what they tell you to do, and it'll come in time like it's supposed to, and I remember I got out of that treatment center on Memorial Day 2002, and that old fiance that I beat up so bad, she come down there and picked me up. And I remember she said on the way back, she said, "Oh, John Pugh and them boys has got a cookout, having a pig picking over there, and they all want you to come by and see them. We ain't got a drink or nothing, but they want you to come by and check them out." I remember I contemplated that for 2 hours on the way up here, thinking, yeah, maybe I'll just go on by there and hang out with old boys. And because that's what I always wanted to do, even in a couple of them periods of trying to get sober myself. I didn't want the consequences. I'd go up there and sit at them old bar stools at Brooks and Fort Page and all that, and I drink them old doors, you know what I mean? And I tried that experiment a couple of times. One time it went real well. I remember I'd been drinking them old doors for about a week or two. Then I got the bright idea, well, hell, I'll just do a little shot of Jaeger. And so I'd sit up there and drink them queso doors and a fifth of Jaeger every night and think I was doing something, you know what I mean? People come in, give me a little pat on the back. Damn, dude, she's still drinking them old doors. You're doing good. Yeah, doing good. I remember we was up there on one Saturday night and they cranked up some old damn Leonard Skinner or something on the old jukebox. Man, I got all excited drinking them O'Doul's and threw one of them right through the big old plate glass window in the front of the bar up there. The place was packed. Thank God I didn't kill nobody. It was probably as far from here to that wall over there where I threw it from. About 10 minutes later, the old bartender come over there and patted me on the shoulder and took me outside out there. And there's the old plate glass window busted out on the sidewalk and everything. And there's an old dual ball in there in the middle. He said, "Dukes, I know you the one because you're the only fool in there drinking them damn old duels." But that was just one of them experiments, in my mind, to drinking them O'Doul's or same thing. Man, I'd quit drinking, I'd eat them pills and, or whatever else. I'd smoke that grass. But, and in my mind, it doesn't make no sense to do that. It doesn't make no sense to drink a case of O'Doul's and a 50 Jaeger, but in my mind it did. I said, hey, I'm doing better. I'm doing good, But, again, so, I got out that Memorial Day and I got back up here and, I went to my first AA meeting over at the old Monday night meeting over there. The primary purpose with all them old guys over there, man. And I tell you another important thing that happened for me. I got out and I come in and I started coming in here. And at that time, old TMS was still around before he died. And I remembered old Tim from bouncing back in the day. From when I was old young and running around in them bars, old Tim had been around he was old seasoned veteran. He'd been around for some years, And I ain't seen Tim in 8-10 years. I thought he was dead. And I got sobered up and come find out he's been in here all that time, He got sobered up, and I remember coming in here and hanging out, and I can remember Tim just kind of, and what I seen it had worked in somebody. I knew how Tim lived and I knew the way he was before he got sobered up, and I seen that it had worked in him. When I went through that treatment center, I think my counselor was probably about 22, 23 years old with a degree in substance abuse and probably ain't never drank a fifth of liquor and done an ounce of cocaine in her life. And I'm sitting here thinking, what the hell does she know about what the hell I'm doing? But when I got here and I seen Tim and I knew the way he lived, and I seen his life was better than mine, and the other guys that was in this meeting at this time, their life was a whole lot better than my life. They didn't want nothing from me. I just remember him saying, hey, dude, if you want what we have, you'll do what we do. And if you don't, you can get on back out there and do what you've been doing. And that was as simple as it was. He didn't drag me in here. He didn't tell me I had to stay. He said, if you want to do this, this is the way. And, and that started the journey, and, I hung out here for a couple weeks and, packed up what little bit of stuff I had left and moved down to Wilmington down there to a recovery house, and partly of that was to get sober, and partly of it was the guilt and shame and the mess I'd made from the business that I run and all the crap that I'd got into there. So a lot of that was kind of running around trying to get the hell out of here and hide my face too. But, it was to go down there and get sobered up. And I went down there and I got in that recovery house and I got me a sponsor. And, for the first time ever, I did what he told me to do. I went and met him once a week and I read that big book. And I got a home group over at that Wilmington Treatment Center, and I started participating in that home group and showing up and making meetings, and, I worked through them steps with that sponsor, and somewhere along that way, man, that spiritual awakening happened. Man, that desire to drink got lifted. And for an alcoholic, that's the greatest gift there is, to have that desire to drink, to be lifted, that obsession to drink. And I worked them 12 steps with him, and I had that spiritual awakening, and what a good life it's been, and I sit down and I think about today, the gifts of sobriety. For one, I was thinking about that on the way up here. I think about the crowd that I run around with. Most of the ones that ain't already sitting in here now or in one of these AA meetings somewhere, most of the ones I run around with are dead and gone now. And I think about what this gift of sobriety is, and I think about them ones that never even got a chance of getting sober, that never even knew what this gift of sobriety was all about, but I sit there and think about in the last 20 years of coming in here and just, put one foot in front of another, a day at a time, man. It ain't easy, they say we trudge the road of happy destiny, and that's what I do, man. I trudge the road. I tell you, I have to come in here and I have to do this AA stuff, and I have to work with other alcoholics, and I have to read this big book, and I got to listen to you guys talk about God working in your life, and me try to find that spiritual solution that they talk about, because I'm not wired that way. I'm not wired to be caring and giving and compassionate, and that ain't the way I was raised up. It's just not the way I'm naturally born, and and it doesn't matter if I'm drinking liquor or not. If I'm not in here and I'm trying to live the right way and seek a spiritual solution, help other alcoholics, I'll revert back. That old pride and ego comes back. That old selfishness and self-centeredness comes back, man. And I turn into a son of a bitch. And that's just the way I'm wired to be, And I have to work at this. I got to work at this at a daily basis of doing these things that they tell us to do in AA, participate, and I think about through the years of getting sober, and I think about how many people that I got sober with that's done the same thing, that's come in here and good things have happened. Sobriety, just like it says, gives them a hell of a life. Good things happen. They get married, they have kids, they start making money, and all that stuff happens. Next thing you know, they get busy. You get too busy to come over here on a Monday night or a Wednesday night or a Sunday night, and it don't take much, I remember 15 years sobriety. That was my hardest year in sobriety, and on the outside, it looked great. I probably made more money than I ever made, have a nice house. I got a wife with 3 kids, and it all looked good, and I got busy with work, and I got busy with kids, playing sports and soccer and football. I wasn't hanging out in the bars and running around them drug dealers. Hell, I was at ball games. I was at soccer practice. I was out working. And a couple of guys that I'd been reading that big book with on a weekly basis disappeared, got drunk or whatever, and I didn't pick up no new guys. And kind of got away from AA, and man, I went to a old dark hole. Man, and I got in that old dark hole, and it was rough, and I remember trying to get back into AA and going sitting in there, and man, it was just like everybody annoyed the shit out of me, and everything that was being said, and I wasn't spiritually fit, and you know, there was an old dude back in my old home group, my first home group at that treatment center over there, man, and he used to say, he said, man, that's what happens. You get away from this old AA and that old pressure pot of life's going to build up on you. It does everybody. He said, when that pressure pot of life builds up on you, he said, one or two things is going to bend, either your elbows or your knees, you know, and you know how true that was. And I remember finding myself on a Monday morning, terrified. Couldn't even get out of bed, man. Didn't even want to get out of bed. Just fear-stricken. I don't even know what the hell it was, but it had me paralyzed, you know, man. And I'd been running on that for, you know, probably 6 months, you know, man, out there every day, driving that damn square peg in that round hole, you know, man. Just all about making a dollar. Nothing about spiritual, nothing about helping nobody else. It was just all about making the damn dollar, you know, and still raising the kids, but I wasn't doing nothing spiritual. You know, we don't do a lot of spiritual talk around the job sites, you know what I mean? So this is where I have to come to get it. And I was just in a bad spot. And I remember rolling out of bed and hitting my knees and crying and going, God, I need some help. I got to have some help. I got to do something. And, you know, and God answered that prayer, you know, and funny story, actually. That was on a Monday. And I got a call on a Tuesday from Teresa. Well, and I didn't even know who she was at the time. Lady from Wilmington, moved down here, lived out on Vass Road out there, was with the Vass group. She called me up about building a house. And I went up there and sit down and met her about building a house and got to talking, and she mentioned she lived in Wilmington, mentioned her ex-husband, and I knew he was in AA. I remember that dude's name from AA, and then she's like, well, I'm in AA. I've been sober for 30 years. And I was like, shit, good gracious. And we sat there and talked for an hour, and she said, matter of fact, I just joined my new home group, the Vass group, and I got a chair this month, and I need somebody to lead the meeting for me Wednesday night. Can you do that? And I was like, holy shit, and I did, you know, and that was that was to put me back in, you know, with just that struggle to get back into AA, you know what I mean? And I mean, it was just, man, that's how it worked when I look back and look at it. But, you know, but I just think about this, trip and sobriety, you know, I mean, like I said, I trudged the road. I mean, it's a good life, you know. I mean, really what it boils down to, if life wasn't better not drinking, I'd be drinking. And there ain't nothing that stops me from going by and getting me a cold beer or anything else other than today I just don't want to. And to have that obsession lift to think about, man, how many Christmases and Thanksgivings and Mama's birthdays I never even could make it for, you know, man. I just think about them times of, you know, just going out and get old cold beer with the boys that come in town and, you know, 3 days after Christmas finally showing back up, you know, and that whole time I sit there knowing the guilt and shame of I'm supposed to be over there with the family and doing all this stuff, and I'm over in some rundown motel or some crack house somewhere or wherever I was at, you know, and just I was in no shape to get to anything like that, you know, and you know, to sit there and think of them times when I couldn't even do that stuff. And to know that obsession to drink's been lifted, you know, and today that there ain't nothing that stops me again from stopping there and getting a beer other than that obsession to drink's been lifted. I don't know how that happened through working in good 12 steps in that spiritual awakening, but it's just it's a gift of God to have that obsession to be removed, you know. So anyway, you know, my message is always of really though is just trying to give some hope, you know, man. If you're new in here and you feel like this thing ain't gonna work, believe me, I sit in here many a times and thinking, man, this stuff ain't for me, it ain't gonna work, and, you know, and then when I finally was beat and there was no light at the end of the tunnel and I was about to die, I just come in here and I did the simple things that they told me to do, man. I started with just raising my hand. I raised my hand in that meeting and said I was new, you know, man, and AA people come up and introduce yourself, say if there's anything you need, let me know, we'll help you out. You know, and that started the process, you know, man, and I did the few simple things that they told me to do, and, you know, AA's gave me a hell of a life, you know, a much better life than I could ever imagine, you know, man. I remember sitting in that treatment center at 30 years old, thinking, man, I'd be better off dead. I mean, what am I going to do the rest of my life? How am I ever going to have any more fun? I just couldn't imagine what I was going to do the rest of my life without drinking, and, you know, man, 20 years later, man, what a gift. I could have never imagined it, you know, and, you know, I didn't know. I didn't know what this gift of sobriety was all about. But anyway, I appreciate you guys coming out and letting me come up here and share for you tonight. And thank you all.